Okay, so this is in response to yesterday's comments. Yesterday's comments from WHITE-HENNY and Mindless Marbles. Yeah. So he says Gary has a valid point about the two objects having different moments of inertia relative to their masses. He wouldn't use those words. It is a problem. The half mass is a hollow cylinder, meaning it has higher moment of inertia relative to its mass than the whole mass. This is the same problem as in the previous similar experiment where the half mass was a sawn off pool ball, but in that previous experiment we got totally different results to this. They were bang in the middle of Gary's prediction and my prediction. Well, it's not really my prediction, it's mainstream science's prediction. Well, erred just in favour of mainstream science's prediction because the flaw in that experiment really wasn't what you were mentioning here, WHITE-HENNY. It was more a case of that object skidding because it was being accelerated too fast and it couldn't grip the table, so it didn't rotate. So it went faster because it wasn't rotating. It skidded, and so that sent the calculations off quite a bit. That's why I wanted to do it with objects that wouldn't skid and would be the same shape, which explains the question that Mindless Marbles raises. He thought it was strange that one of the cylinders wasn't hollow, but I really don't get why that's puzzling, because it's obvious why that's the case. The difficulty of trying to make two objects of different masses but the same shape. Well, they have to be exactly 2-to-1 different masses, 2-to-1 ratio different masses, but of exactly the same shape in all respects. Apparently, according to you and Mindless Marbles here, I think, we should somehow expect them to be both exactly the same shaped cylinders as well. One cannot be a solid, cannot be infilled with lead because it will make a dramatic difference. So let me show you this. That seems to prove the opposite. That the point that you're raising is such a minor point, you would need really sensitive equipment to measure it. It seems virtually immeasurable, the difference, as far as I can determine anyway. Just using gravity instead of a lever to propel the two objects the same distance as in that experiment. If you're propelling them over a longer distance, then yes, I'm quite certain that there would be a more obvious difference between the two, one being the cylinder and the other being technically a disc, I believe. But that isn't the case. The experiment was measuring over about 12 centimeters total distance, if I remember right. Anyway, I recreated the experiment. I still had the same materials, dug them all out, and I made an experiment which is pretty obvious how it's working. It doesn't really need any explanation from me, and it speaks for itself. That agreeing with Gary, saying that Gary's got a point, is simply not true. It's not a valid point. It might be valid from an extreme technical point of view. Yes, I'm not denying that one has greater moment of inertia relative to the masses. I'm not denying that. All I'm saying is it's such an irrelevant point. You could also argue that one of them has different air resistance because the ends on one, the ends are open, and the other, the ends are flat. I don't know enough about aerodynamics to figure out in what way that would affect them. But you might as well cite things like that and say, well, one's going to go slower or faster due to the end shape being different. I don't know, but again, it would be utterly pointless to argue that because clearly it does not make a difference. The experiment came out exactly as predicted. I could have slid them, and that was intended to be the next phase of the experiment, to put them on a slippy plastic sheet and just slide them, because Gary changed his tune at some point and said that would be a better experiment. Ideally, it should be done where they are intentionally made to skid, so they wouldn't be rolling. Then we wouldn't have this rolling inertia. I can't remember what the term is. I'm not very technically minded really on these matters, but you know what I mean. If they aren't turning, then that wouldn't be an issue if they were just placed on the plastic mat and slid end on. Okay, anyway, I'll shut up and let you see what I've done, so you can judge for yourself. I've done them fast and the normal speed, and then in slow-mo in each case, and I've done about a dozen or more. And one or two of them come out in your favour a tiny, tiny bit. But I'm not going to bother frame counting, because it's just so obvious to the naked eye. And the sound, the audio, you can hear that they hit together or virtually together. So your point seems a bit moot, to be honest. Okay, I'll love you and leave you with that. Bye. You should recognise that the experiment's still set up how it was before, except I've locked off the bar, taped it down there so it can't move, so that we can test just using gravity, see how much difference it makes. So basically, this grey board, this big grey board that it was originally mounted on, I've set that to the same distance as before, because originally we had this here, and it at the 4.5 inch mark, and it measured about 8.5 centimeters from the edge of that to the front of the tray, 8.5 centimeters. So this grey board, the original grey board, it's mounted. Just walk on it for a minute. It's a very thick board. It's mounted. It's resting on this white board here, with this piece of wood here fixed to it. So this acts as a hinge, because I'm going to lift up the other end of the grey board. Oops. Using this board taped to it there, fixed to it, so it's not going to keep moving. So it's like a lever. Oops, like that. Yeah, okay. So then it'll tip these forward using gravity instead of the spring force. Note that both these objects have similar rotational momentum, or whatever the phrase would be. Both objects continue to rotate when they stop. Even though, see what I mean? It's not just because one is a solid, effectively, doesn't seem to be making any difference to. Anyway, it obviously isn't making any difference to the experiment, is it? The start off the same and the end the same. Oh, it's gone out of sync, the timing now. Okay.